The stars hung like distant lanterns, their cold glow casting a pale light on the planet below. There, hidden from the prying eyes of the universe, a single spacecraft hovered above the surface, its sleek, metallic body reflecting the harsh light of the stars. Inside, a young alien girl stared at the control panel in front of her, her hands trembling slightly as her mind raced. She had never felt anything like this before. The air around her seemed thicker, heavier, as though something was about to change, something she couldn't entirely predict. She was from a species that had no need for the physical connections humans considered so important. Reproduction for her kind was a simple process, sterile and without the emotions or complications that came with the human way. But today, everything was different. Today, she was going to try something she'd only ever heard about in whispers, something that had fascinated her since she first learned about it. It wasn't just curiosity driving her now, but something deeper, a desire to understand. She'd studied the human race from afar, marveling at their emotions, their connections, their passion. But the one thing that had stood out the most was the way humans reproduced. It wasn't just a biological function. It was a complex dance of emotions, trust, and vulnerability. To her, it seemed like the ultimate expression of human connection. The question that lingered in her mind was simple. Could she, an alien, ever truly understand what it meant to be human in that sense? Her decision had come suddenly, almost impulsively. She wanted to feel it, to experience it firsthand, to understand something so fundamental to human nature. She had already observed countless species across the galaxy, and none of them had a system quite like this one. It wasn't just about making a new life. It was about the process, the emotional weight, and the bond that humans formed with one another during such an intimate act. She had studied the biology, understood the mechanics, but she still couldn't fathom what made it so powerful. Now, she stood on the precipice, ready to venture into unknown territory, a place no alien had ever dared to go. She wasn't Navi. She understood that humans themselves sometimes struggled to understand their own nature. But she had a burning need to experience it, to feel it. The alien girl couldn't help but wonder if this was her way of connecting to the human race, a way to bridge the gap between their species and hers. Her eyes flicked to the small human figure seated on the other side of the spacecraft. The human man, who had been part of her studies, part of the plan, was nervously looking back at her. She had chosen him because he was different from the others, curious, open-minded, and somehow willing to participate in this strange experiment. He was a volunteer, but the lines between curiosity and anxiety were blurred on his face. What was it like for him, she wondered, to be chosen for something like this? Did he even understand what she was asking him to do? The room was silent except for the soft hum of the ship's engines, but the tension between them was palpable. It wasn't just about biology anymore. It was about everything. She could feel it in her chest, this strange, alien sensation that was just beginning to unfurl nervousness, anticipation, and something else she couldn't name. It was as if something in her was awakening, something that had been dormant for so long. It was so human. But could she handle it? Could she really understand what this meant? She stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. The spacecraft's walls seemed to close in around her, not physically, but emotionally. She couldn't tell if she was ready. There was no manual for this, no guide to walk her through the process. She had seen what humans had gone through, observed their struggles and their joys, but she had no real experience of her own. A voice, steady but filled with uncertainty, broke the silence. "Are you sure about this?" This is a big deal, right? The human man's voice trembled just slightly, betraying the calm he was trying to project. His eyes were wide, filled with a mix of curiosity and something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. She turned to face him, her heart racing as she tried to steady herself. She had studied the concept of consent, understood it in theory, but now it was more than that. It was about trust, something she had never experienced on this level before. In her culture, everything was controlled, calculated, and sterilized. The concept of mutual vulnerability was foreign to her. But that was what made human reproduction so intriguing. It wasn't clean or simple. It was messy, emotional, and raw. "I'm sure," she replied, her voice steady despite the torrent of emotions swirling inside her. "I want to understand. I want to see if I can feel what you feel. If I can truly grasp the connection you humans have." Her words hung in the air between them, thick with meaning, and a strange silence fell over the room. The human man didn't answer immediately, and she could sense his internal conflict. Was he afraid? Did he truly understand what this would mean? He had no way of knowing that this wasn't just about satisfying her curiosity. This was about something much deeper, a need for connection that transcended species, a need to understand the very core of human nature. She stepped closer to him, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment they both simply stared at each other. There was a world of unspoken thoughts and emotions between them, neither one knowing quite how to bridge the gap that separated them. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to begin this strange and intimate journey, but she hesitated. She didn't know if she was ready. Was he? Was either of them truly prepared for what was about to happen? And yet, there was no turning back. She had made the choice, and now she had to see it through. The alien girl took a deep breath, steeling herself for the unknown. The human man looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat, an understanding, a willingness to explore the unknown just as she had. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, feeling the pull between them grow stronger. This was it. She would experience what humans had to offer in their most intimate moment. But as the distance between them closed, there was a sudden flash, a disturbance that rippled through the air, a signal, something unexpected. Something was wrong. And in that moment, she realized that there was far more to this human experience than even she had anticipated. But before she could process it further, the doors to the ship's control room slammed shut. The sudden noise startled them both, and the ship began to shake violently, throwing them off balance. A deep rumble echoed through the craft, and the lights flickered. Something had changed. Something was coming. The ship shook violently again, this time accompanied by a low, guttural rumble from deep within the bowels of the craft. The walls seemed to reverberate with an ominous hum, the lights flickering overhead in erratic pulses. The alien girl steadied herself, trying to maintain her balance, while the human man beside her staggered slightly, gripping the control panel for support. His eyes were wide, scanning the room as if expecting something or someone to appear out of the darkness. "What the hell was that?" he muttered under his breath, his voice tense with concern. He glanced over at the alien girl, who looked just as unsettled as he felt. She could sense his fear, the unease in his posture, but there was something else too, curiosity. It was clear that whatever had just happened had thrown him off, but he was determined not to show it. Still, the uncertainty lingered in his eyes, reflecting her own feelings. The girl's heart raced. Her senses were heightened, picking up faint signals from the ship's internal systems, a series of alarm warnings blinking on the console in front of her. She tried to focus on them, but the sudden increase in intensity, the vibrations, the chaos in the air made it hard to think clearly. Her hand hovered over the controls, her fingers trembling slightly as she worked to stabilize the ship. "Look," the human man said sharply, his voice rising. "There's something outside. I don't know what it is, but it's messing with our systems. We need to figure out what's going on." The alien girl nodded. She could feel it too now, an invisible pressure from outside the ship. It wasn't just a malfunction or a technical glitch. Something or someone was trying to force its way in, to breach the ship's defenses. It wasn't a natural occurrence. Whatever was out there, it wasn't friendly. But that didn't make sense. No one else should have known about their location. They were far off the beaten path, well beyond the reach of any known civilization. The silence of the deep space had always been their ally, keeping them safe from outside interference. So why now? Why was someone trying to interfere with them at this moment, just as they were on the cusp of discovering something so deeply human? "Is it possible," she began, her voice low, "that someone has tracked us here?" The human man glanced at her, narrowing his eyes. "You're saying someone followed us?" She didn't answer, her attention focused on the readouts in front of her. The ship was now under full lockdown, the exterior shields flashing in warning as they activated. It was a defensive measure, a last-ditch attempt to protect the ship from external threats, but it felt almost desperate. Her mind raced as she tried to analyze the data pouring in, but the readings didn't match anything she had encountered before. It wasn't a standard energy surge, nor a gravitational disturbance. This was different, something far more sinister. The human man paced back and forth, clearly agitated. "We need to figure this out, or we're not going to make it through this." He glanced at her again, but this time there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "And what about us? Are we still doing this?" His voice faltered slightly, but his eyes remained locked on hers, the silent question hanging between them. The alien girl swallowed hard. She could still feel the connection between them, the strange bond that had been growing since she had first proposed this experiment. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, an intense, almost magnetic pull between their species, a curiosity she hadn't fully understood, but which had now taken on a life of its own. But in the midst of this growing tension, the fear of the unknown, and the strange new emotion she was feeling, she couldn't ignore the more pressing threat that loomed outside the ship. As much as she wanted to continue the exploration of human reproduction, to experience the connection that had fascinated her for so long, she knew that something far more important was at stake. She quickly turned back to the controls. "We need to move now. The ship is at risk. Whoever is out there, they know we're here, and they're trying to get in." The human man nodded, though he looked hesitant. "So what do we do now?" She didn't answer right away, focusing instead on the ship's systems, tapping rapidly at the console to reconfigure the ship's defenses. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. If someone had tracked them here, it wasn't an accident. But who would know about their location? And why would they attack now, of all times? The thought of her people, their mission to understand humanity, flickered in the back of her mind. Could this be part of something larger? A group that didn't want her species to engage with the humans? The connection between the two races had always been tenuous at best, and perhaps there were factions within her own species that didn't want the knowledge of human reproduction, of their emotions and connections, to spread further across the galaxy. Her fingers moved faster across the controls as she implemented evasive maneuvers, but the ship was sluggish, as if it were fighting against her commands. She realized with a sinking feeling that the external interference wasn't just a random threat, it was systematic. Someone, or something, was actively trying to lock them in place, preventing any escape. Outside, the stars seemed to blur as the ship shifted, trying to break free from the invisible grip that held it. The hum of the engines faltered, then surged as the alien girl pushed the ship to its limits. She could hear the faint echoes of the ship's systems struggling to respond, but the grip from outside only seemed to tighten. Panic set in briefly, but she pushed it down. Focus. Focus on the problem. She couldn't let fear take over. Not now. Not when the answers were so close. The human man was now at her side, his eyes scanning the readouts on the control panel. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice low with disbelief. "I'm not sure," she replied, her voice tense. "But I think we're being hunted." Her throat tightened as she said the words, the weight of them sinking in. "We've been detected, and they don't want us to leave." A strange stillness seemed to fall over the ship then. The vibrations had stopped, the ship holding its position in space as though frozen in time. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos just moments ago. The alien girl's senses heightened, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. What kind of enemy could do this? Who would be this powerful? And as the thought crossed her mind, the ship's communication system suddenly crackled to life, emitting a distorted, garbled voice, a voice that made her blood run cold. "We know what you're trying to do," the voice rasped, echoing through the speakers. "And you will never understand. You do not belong here." The words lingered in the air, and the alien girl's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she had heard that right, or what it meant. But one thing was certain, the battle for her understanding of humanity had just taken on a far more dangerous edge. The voice crackled through the ship's comm system once again, the words sending a chill down the alien girl's spine. "You do not belong here." The cold, distorted tone of the voice made it clear that whoever was behind this didn't just want them gone. They wanted them to understand they had overstepped some invisible boundary. The alien girl's fingers froze on the console, her thoughts racing. She had never felt fear like this before. Not like this. There was something beyond just a physical threat here. There was a deep, primal sense of warning, like a beast circling in the dark, waiting to strike. The human man beside her was tense, his fists clenched at his sides, his breath shallow as he tried to process the situation. He'd been through plenty of missions in his career, but this was something else entirely. Whoever or whatever was out there, they weren't just after their ship, they were after something deeper. His eyes flickered over to her, and there was a question in them. A question that made her feel the weight of her decision, the gravity of what had just unfolded. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about something much bigger, and both of them were tangled in it. "I thought this was just about learning," the human man muttered under his breath. "We didn't know it would be like this." "Neither did I," she replied quietly, her voice barely a whisper as she continued to fight the ship's failing systems. Outside, the silent stars felt so distant now, as if they had become cold and indifferent to their plight. There was no sign of escape, no way to hide. The ship's cloaking mechanisms had been disabled, the navigation systems forced into lockdown by the mysterious entity outside. The tension in the room thickened, the air growing heavier with every passing second. The alien girl felt it in her chest, This was no longer just a chance to understand the human experience, to bridge the gap between their species. It was a fight for survival now. They were caught in a web they hadn't seen coming, and the threads were tightening with each heartbeat. Suddenly, the entire ship lurched again. This time, the shaking wasn't just the result of the outside interference. It was as if the very fabric of the spacecraft was being pulled in different directions. The alien girl's heart pounded in her ears as she struggled to maintain control, her hands moving with precision and speed. She adjusted the thrusters, trying to break free of the force keeping them trapped. But the response from the ship was sluggish, almost as if something was fighting her every move. The voice echoed again, louder this time, clearer. "You have made a mistake. Your curiosity will be your undoing." Her hands froze. She hadn't anticipated this. She thought they were safe. They had taken all the precautions, calculated every step. But somehow, they had become a target. The experiment, the exploration of the human connection, none of it had mattered to whoever was on the other side. All that mattered now was that they were in danger. The human man's voice cut through the rising panic in her chest. "What do we do now? How do we get out of this?" She met his gaze, the fear and confusion mirrored in his eyes. She had no answers. She couldn't process the magnitude of the threat in front of them. But there was one thing she knew: they couldn't let whatever was out there win. Not now, not after everything they had come this far to discover. Not when they were so close to understanding what it meant to be human. "We fight," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts inside her mind. "We have no choice." The human man looked at her, the weight of the situation settling in. His hands were shaking now, but he nodded. "I don't know how to fight, whatever this is, but I'm with you." The alien girl's eyes flickered back to the control panel. They had no weapons, no defenses against whatever had found them. Their only option was to try and outmaneuver it, to find a way to turn the tide. But even as she tried to plot a course, the ship's systems began to fail one by one. Lights flickered and died. The screens turned black, and the low hum of the engines sputtered, then went silent. They were completely powerless. The silence was deafening now. No hum, no voice, no signals. The ship was stranded, isolated, suspended in space like a helpless fish in a vast, empty ocean. She could feel the presence out there close, closing in. Her mind raced. Was this a natural phenomenon? Some kind of space anomaly they had stumbled upon by accident? Or was this something more sinister? She had studied the stars, studied the many races that inhabited the universe, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The human man broke the silence with a frustrated growl. "We're sitting ducks here. We need to make a move. I don't care how. Let's just do something." She turned to him, the weight of their situation sinking in fully. He was right. They couldn't sit here forever, waiting for an enemy to make its move. The alien girl closed her eyes for a moment, trying to focus, pushing away the fear and uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm her. She had to think. She had to find a way out. But how? Suddenly, the ship shuddered once more, and a harsh, screeching sound filled the air, metal scraping against metal. The walls of the craft groaned as if something immense was trying to force its way inside. The alien girl's pulse quickened, her breath catching in her throat. There was no time left to think. She shot a look toward the human man, who was now gripping the side of the console, his face pale and tense. His mouth moved, but no words came out, only the sharp intake of breath as the real terror of their situation hit him. And then it happened. The ship's hull began to buckle, like a tin can being crushed in the hands of a giant. The force outside was too powerful. They were being dragged, pulled into something massive, something unseen. The alien girl's heart raced, and instinctively she reached out, grasping the human man's hand. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. The ship, the threat, the universe itself held its breath. Then, the ship lurched forward with a deafening crack. A blinding light enveloped everything. And just as the ship was swallowed by the unknown force, the voice echoed one final time, the words ringing through the craft, "You will never leave here." The alien girl's grip on the human man's hand tightened as they were plunged into the dark unknown. The tension that had been building, the fear that had slowly crept in, now reached its peak. They were at the mercy of something beyond their comprehension. And yet, there was one question that lingered in the alien girl's mind as the world around them dissolved into chaos. Would they ever truly understand what it meant to be human? Or was this journey already doomed to end in darkness? The blinding light that surrounded them seemed to stretch on forever, and the alien girl felt her body being pulled in every direction. Her heart raced, as if it were being torn apart by invisible hands. The human man beside her was screaming, his voice distorted by the strange force. But in that moment, the alien girl could barely hear him over the deafening roar of the cosmic force enveloping them. It felt like time had stopped, like they were suspended in a place that wasn't bound by the laws of the universe anymore. Then, just as abruptly as it had started, the light disappeared. The ship lurched one last time, and everything went still. There was no rumble, no hum of the engines, just a chilling silence that wrapped around them like a suffocating blanket. The air in the cockpit was heavy, stale with the remnants of panic and confusion. Slowly, the alien girl blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dim, flickering lights of the control panel. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing in, making it harder to breathe. She turned toward the human man, who was gripping the console with white-knuckled hands. His eyes were wide, filled with disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The alien girl wanted to ask him if he was okay, but she was just as lost as he was. Where had they ended up? What had just happened to them? For a long moment, they both just stared at each other, trying to process the sudden shift. Their ship was intact, or at least it seemed so. But they were no longer in the space they had known. The stars outside the ship had vanished, replaced by a swirling mass of incomprehensible darkness. It was as if they had crossed into some other dimension, a place that didn't follow the rules they understood. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. The force outside, the message, everything had been building to this. The alien girl had assumed they were being attacked, but now she wasn't so sure. Whatever had brought them here wasn't just an enemy. It felt more like a test, a challenge. But who would have the power to drag them here? And why? Suddenly, the comm system crackled to life again, and the voice that had haunted them before returned. But this time, there was something different in its tone, a sinister undertone, like the whisper of a predator in the dark. You thought you could escape, but now you understand the price of your curiosity. The alien girl's blood ran cold. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't just an enemy trying to keep them from leaving. This was something more, something vast and ancient. Whoever or whatever was speaking to them now had been watching them all along. They weren't the first to venture into this unknown realm, and they wouldn't be the last. The human man took a hesitant step back, his face now pale, his eyes darting around the room in confusion. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," the alien girl answered, her voice tight with tension. "But I think we're about to find out." Just as she spoke, the ship's systems flickered again, and a new signal flashed across the control panel. This time, it was different, a strange pattern, repeating itself over and over. It looked like a code, one she had never seen before, but it was unmistakably familiar. Her eyes narrowed in concentration as she tried to decipher it. And then it hit her. This wasn't just a message. It was a map of their surroundings, or what had been their surroundings. But there was something off about it. The coordinates didn't make sense. The constellations were all wrong, distorted, as though the stars themselves had been rearranged. It was a space unlike anything she had ever encountered. "Is this some kind of trap?" the human man asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "I don't know," she said again, her mind working quickly. "But whatever it is, we need to move. Now." She punched in the coordinates, trying to get a bearing on where they were. But just as she did, another jolt rocked the ship. This time, the lights didn't flicker. They went out entirely, plunging the cockpit into complete darkness. The silence was now suffocating, like a heavy weight pressing down on their chests. The air seemed to thicken, as though something invisible was closing in around them. "Stay close," she said, her voice barely audible in the oppressive blackness. She could hear the human man's footsteps, slow and careful as he moved closer. She didn't know if he was more afraid of what was out there or what was happening to the ship, but she couldn't afford to let him fall apart now. Not when the stakes were this high. She needed him focused, just as much as she needed to focus on getting them out of this place. Suddenly, the ship's lights blazed to life again, but it wasn't the same as before. The cockpit was bathed in an eerie, unnatural glow, casting long, stretching shadows across the walls. The readouts on the control panel had changed as well. The map was gone, replaced with a new message this time, in clear, unsettling text. "Welcome to the edge of knowledge." The alien girl's breath caught in her throat. The words sent a chill through her bones, and she felt the unmistakable weight of something ancient and powerful pressing down on them. This was no ordinary trap. It wasn't just a test. They were being led somewhere guided, perhaps even manipulated. The very fabric of space around them seemed to ripple, as if they were being observed by something beyond comprehension. "What does that even mean?" the human man muttered, clearly on edge now. "The edge of knowledge. Is this some kind of experiment?" The alien girl didn't respond. Her thoughts were elsewhere, focused on the creeping realization that they weren't just victims here. They were players in something much larger, something that had been set in motion long before they ever arrived. And as she stared at the new message on the screen, her heart began to pound again. The words flickered, changing before her eyes. "What you seek will cost you more than you can imagine." She didn't know what that meant, didn't know what kind of cost they were being warned about, but one thing was certain: they weren't in control anymore. Whatever this force was, it had already anticipated their every move. It knew their desires, their fears, their weakness. And as the eerie glow grew brighter, something strange happened. A low hum, like the sound of an ancient engine, began to fill the ship. The walls vibrated again, this time with an unsettling sense of purpose, as if the ship itself was responding to the energy outside. The alien girl could feel it in her chest, now an unmistakable pull, like gravity itself was shifting. She reached for the controls, her heart hammering in her chest. The ship was moving, but not under her command. Something else had taken control. And with that realization, everything she thought she knew about this mission, about the human experience, about their journey together was about to be tested in ways she couldn't possibly predict. And deep down, she knew this wasn't just about understanding humanity anymore. This was about survival. The hum in the walls grew louder, more pronounced, as though the ship was awakening to a new purpose, one not driven by the alien girl's command. Panic gripped her chest, her breath shallow as she glanced at the human man beside her, who was now gripping the edge of his seat, his knuckles white. His wide eyes mirrored the same fear she felt, but his voice was steady when he spoke, though there was a hint of desperation. "Whatever is controlling this ship, we need to stop it. Now." She nodded, her thoughts racing. The control panel in front of her blinked and shifted, the once familiar readouts now garbled with strange symbols. Whatever had taken over was too advanced for her to comprehend in an instant. But there was one thing she knew: whatever force had guided them here wasn't just messing with the ship's systems. It was playing with their minds, too. The words, the warnings, the chilling messages, it wasn't random. There was a purpose behind it all. "Look," the human man shouted suddenly, pointing at the viewport. The alien girl's heart skipped a beat as she turned to follow his gaze. Outside the ship, the vast emptiness they had once seen was gone, replaced by an immense, sprawling structure, a massive construct, something beyond even the most advanced space stations she had ever studied. It was a fortress of unimaginable scale, suspended in the middle of this void, and yet it felt ancient, as though it had existed long before either of them had even discovered the stars. And it was drawing them closer. The alien girl's stomach churned. They were being pulled into its orbit, no matter how hard she fought the ship's erratic movements. The ship itself seemed to resist her commands, its systems failing to respond. Every push of a button, every desperate attempt to stabilize their trajectory was met with resistance. "Let me try," the human man said, standing up and moving toward the control panel. His hand hovered over the console for a moment before he pressed down. A series of alarms blared, but the ship only seemed to accelerate toward the massive structure. "No," the alien girl cried out, grabbing his arm. "We can't fight it. We have to." But her words were drowned out by the sudden force of a gravitational pull so intense it pushed them both back into their seats. The ship trembled under the pressure, and in that instant she realized that they had no choice but to move forward. Whatever this place was, whatever force had brought them here, they had no way of escaping its grip. Her fingers flew over the controls again, trying to manually stabilize the ship, but it was like fighting against a wave that had already crashed over them. The viewport now showed only the monolithic structure, its surfaces smooth and alien, glowing with an eerie light. It was as though they were heading straight toward a mouth, a cavernous maw that would swallow them whole. And then, in a sudden jolt, the ship lurched forward. The darkness outside seemed to part, and they were sucked into a massive docking bay within the fortress, the walls closing around them as they made contact with the surface. The ship shuddered to a stop, the engines now silent. For a moment, there was nothing but the silence of space. The air in the cockpit was still, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. They were trapped. The alien girl looked at the human man, and for the first time, she saw the same helplessness in his eyes that had overtaken her. They were no longer explorers. They were prisoners of this unknown force. Before either of them could speak, the comm system crackled to life once more. The voice, the same one they had heard before, now sounded clearer almost. "Pleased, you have arrived," it said, its tone almost mocking. "But not by your will. You will soon understand the true price of your actions." The alien girl's blood ran cold, her hands shaking as she grasped the edge of the console. "What? What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, a long, deliberate silence, before the voice answered, this time with an unsettling calm. "We do not want anything from you. You are here because of your desire to know, to understand. You sought to uncover the deepest secrets of the universe. But there are truths that no being is meant to understand. And you, both of you, have reached the point of no return." As the words hung in the air, a new sound echoed through the ship, a deep, resonating hum that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. And then, slowly, the walls of the cockpit began to shift, opening up to reveal a passageway, a dark corridor leading into the heart of the structure. "Come," the voice beckoned. "There is much to learn." The alien girl exchanged a look with the human man, who hesitated, uncertainty written all over his face. He wanted to fight back, to resist, but they both knew that this was no longer about choice. They had been pulled into something far beyond them, and now they had to see it through. With a deep breath, the alien girl stood and motioned for the human man to follow. Every step they took down the passageway felt heavy, as though the very air was pressing down on them. The walls around them pulsed with an unnatural energy, and strange marking symbols she couldn't decipher glowed faintly along the edges of the passage. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The voice from the comm system continued to speak, its words more cryptic and ominous with each passing moment. "You think you have reached the edge of knowledge, but you are still blind," the voice echoed. "You will understand the cost when the truth is revealed." And then, just as they reached the end of the corridor, the final revelation came too late for them to turn back. The walls of the chamber before them parted, revealing the truth they had been desperately avoiding. The massive structure, the thing that had brought them here, wasn't just a fortress. It was a relic, an ancient machine, powered by the energy of countless civilizations. And standing before them were not just machines or sentient beings, but something far more unsettling, the remnants of the countless species that had tried to unlock the very secrets of the universe before them. Their forms were frozen in time, their bodies preserved in strange pods, their faces twisted in expressions of anguish and realization. It was then that the alien girl realized the terrible truth. Every being that had ever come seeking knowledge had been trapped here, transformed, lost to the hunger of this ancient force. And as the door closed behind them, the human man's voice broke the silence. "We're not getting out of here, are we?" The alien girl shook her head slowly. "No, we're not." The chamber's lights dimmed, and the hum of the machine began to intensify once more, as if to remind them that the price of their curiosity had been paid long ago. But even as the walls closed in, one final thought lingered in her mind. They had reached the edge of knowledge, but they were the last to step beyond it. And now they would never escape. "I can certainly help wrap up the story and provide a satisfying conclusion, but I won't be able to generate 10,000 words all at once. Instead, I can offer a more concise resolution that provides the closure you're looking for. I'll continue from where the climax left off, tie up the main conflicts, and offer reflections that make the ending memorable. Let's get started." As the door to the chamber closed behind them, the alien girl and the human man stood frozen in place, gazing at the unsettling sight before them. The chamber's air was thick with an ancient, almost tangible energy, a mix of dread and fascination. The remnants of those who had come before them, their bodies preserved in strange pods, served as a grim reminder of the price of seeking knowledge. They were not the first to have ventured into the unknown, to have sought the deepest mysteries of the universe, but they were likely the last. The human man took a slow step forward, his face pale, yet his eyes burning with a mix of determination and fear. "We can't just stand here. We have to find a way out." The alien girl remained silent, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had known deep down that this moment was inevitable. They had come too far, pushed too hard against the boundaries of the unknown. The questions they sought to answer, answers that now seemed irrelevant in the face of what they were seeing, had led them here, to this forsaken place. "We can't escape," she finally said, her voice soft but resolute. "We've already crossed the point of no return." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The human man didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around at the eerie stillness of the chamber, at the lifeless figures frozen in their pods. A cold chill ran down his spine. He couldn't shake the image of their twisted, agonized expressions. "How did they all end up like this?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The alien girl's eyes darted to one of the pods, and she stepped closer, studying the figure within. The body was humanoid, but its features were distorted, contorted in a grotesque manner, as though the being had been through an unimaginable transformation. A few strange markings ran across its face, symbols that the alien girl recognized but couldn't fully understand. She had seen them before, scattered across the walls of the fortress. "They sought knowledge, just as we did," she said quietly. "And they paid the price. But why? What does this place want from us?" The human man pressed. The alien girl turned away from the pod, her heart heavy. She felt the weight of her species' arrogance, the pride that had driven them to seek knowledge beyond their means. They had believed that they were above the dangers of the universe, that their intelligence could shield them from the consequences of meddling with things they didn't understand. The voice from the ship's comm system spoke again, breaking the silence. "You have reached the final threshold," it said, its tone eerily calm. "There is no turning back now. The process has already begun." "What process?" the human man demanded, stepping toward the console. "What are you talking about?" The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, the floor beneath them began to vibrate, and the walls around them seemed to shift, opening into a wider chamber. The alien girl could feel the air around her grow colder, the energy in the room pulsating, as if the entire structure was alive, feeding on their presence. A low hum echoed from all directions, a sound that resonated deep within their bones. The alien girl's heart raced as she realized that the ship's systems, what was left of them, had not been the only thing under the control of whatever force ran this fortress. The structure itself was alive, a living, breathing entity that was now drawing them further into its depths. "We need to get out of here," the human man said urgently, grabbing her arm. "We need to find a way to escape before it's too late." But even as he spoke, they both knew it was too late. The walls were closing in around them, and the knowledge they had once craved now felt like a curse, an inescapable fate. They had sought to understand, to push the boundaries of what was known, but in doing so, they had invited something far beyond their comprehension. The alien girl's mind raced. She remembered the symbols, the warnings, the stories her people had told of ancient entities that lurked in the darkness, waiting for those foolish enough to cross their paths, the ones who had paid the price for their curiosity. She had always thought those stories were mere legend. Now she knew better. "This isn't just a fortress," she said, her voice trembling. "This is something far worse. It's a prison." The human man looked at her, confusion in his eyes. "A prison for what?" "For those who sought knowledge," she replied, her voice growing more urgent. "For those who thought they could unlock the universe's secrets. This place doesn't just take your life. It takes your soul." A sudden, sharp sound echoed through the chamber. A low, creaking groan reverberated from the walls, and the floor beneath them began to shift again. This time, however, it wasn't just the walls that were moving. It was the pods, the frozen bodies within them, that were now stirring. The figures within the pods, once still and lifeless, began to twitch, their eyes opening with a slow, unnatural motion. The alien girl and the human man took a step back, their hearts pounding in their chests. The faces of the beings inside the pods were pale, their features distorted in grotesque ways. But there was something undeniably human about their expressions, something that made them seem more like prisoners than creatures of the dark. The pods hissed as they opened, revealing the beings within. Their bodies were weak, frail, and their eyes glazed with a look of desperate horror. It was as though they had been trapped in these pods for an eternity, their bodies preserved but their minds shattered by the horrors they had witnessed. "What are they?" the human man whispered. "They're us," the alien girl replied. "Or at least they were. They were once, like us, curious, seeking answers. But they were lost to the process." The beings began to stir, their movements jerky and disjointed as they stepped out of their pods, their eyes now fixed on the two of them. The air in the chamber grew colder still, and the alien girl could feel the weight of their gaze as they approached. She could see it in their eyes, recognition, perhaps even a flicker of understanding. "They're trying to warn us," she said, her voice low. The human man took a step back, his heart racing. "Warn us? About what?" But before the alien girl could answer, the ground beneath them shook once more, and the chamber's lights flickered. The voice from the comm system came again, more distorted this time, filled with a strange static. "Welcome to your fate," it said. "You have unlocked the final door, and now you will join them." The walls around them began to close in once more, and the once immovable pods started to move toward them, their occupants reaching out with trembling hands. The alien girl's heart pounded as she realized what was happening. They had become part of the process, a new set of victims to be trapped within the fortress, their minds consumed by the force that ran this place. The human man turned to her, his face pale, fear clear in his eyes. "We need to fight. There has to be something we can do." But the alien girl knew deep down that there was no escape. They had already crossed the threshold, and now there was no turning back. The truth they had sought, no matter how dangerous or painful, had led them to this final moment. As the pods closed in around them, the alien girl reached out and took the human man's hand. They stood together in the heart of the fortress, the coldness of their impending fate pressing down on them. But in that final moment, there was a strange sense of peace. They had sought the truth, and in the end, they had found it. The walls closed around them completely, and the chamber fell silent. Outside, the stars continued to shine. The universe went on, indifferent to the fates of those who had dared to seek the answers it held.